Before you declutter next, make sure you're not falling into one of these 4 decluttering myths. Hello and welcome to Abundantly Minimal. My name is Sarah and thank you for joining me today to discuss 4 decluttering myths. These different myths and misconceptions about decluttering can lead us to make mistakes when we're decluttering or not really have a clear purpose or understanding about how it works. And especially if you find yourself getting ready to do more decluttering, I wanted to make sure you weren't being held back by any of these ideas. Let's begin. Myth number 1 is that you can declutter once and for all. And unfortunately, this is not the case. I think decluttering is much more like a marathon and not a sprint. You're going to likely have phases of more active decluttering where you do have to work harder, but then there's also going to be periodic maintenance type of decluttering that happens later on. Maybe it starts out with you doing more active decluttering in different sections of your home, and then eventually you switch into periodic, maybe like monthly or every other month, even seasonally type of declutters to make sure your space is still overall maintained and that you're able to find what you need. It's especially important for us to realize that you're not going to be able to knock it all out at once if you are starting with a larger number of items. The more clutter we have, the more time it is going to take, unfortunately. But no matter when you start, if you start today, you will then never have to deal with as much clutter again as you will on your starting point. Think about your space, break it into small, actionable steps, and start working on it. Yes, it's a time-consuming journey, but it will be so worth it. Myth number 2 is that you can only keep things that spark joy. Now, I have to admit, I've been a minimalist for many years, and I have never consumed any full episodes or read a book from Marie Kondo, so I know that I personally am not an expert at anything that she is suggesting, but I am aware that overall she's become pretty popular within the minimalism space and is leading a lot of people to live a more minimal life, which is amazing. So obviously I'm not aware of her full message that she's sharing, but it seems like the concept that gets transmitted the most to others who maybe also haven't consumed that media is identifying things that spark joy. And I think that's an amazing approach. However, that doesn't really work for everything. I can think of many very practical items in my life that genuinely don't spark joy, but I know they're really important and I use them regularly, like a vacuum or a lamp or certain pieces of cookware. It doesn't necessarily bring joy. I'm not, so excited to use things, but they're practical, they're useful. And so I think when we have a more well-rounded approach, on one side balancing, does it spark joy? And on the other side balancing, do I actually use it? If we put these 2 categories together, I think then you've got a much more rational approach to think about both the usefulness as well as the joy that it provides. Another myth about decluttering is that before you can declutter, you need to make sure you get some organizational supplies. You see, it's really interesting to me how there's a lot of people within the organizing field who talk about minimalism, but wait, you need to buy these containers before you can start decluttering. And it seems kind of like an interesting situation. Obviously, there's many beautiful visuals of organized homes that have a lot of these different organizational tools and supplies. But the thing is, you don't need that. And unfortunately, sometimes those supplies actually enable us to hold on to more clutter than we need. In some of my past videos, I've talked about clutter enablers, large pieces of furniture whose purpose is really to just store stuff. And sometimes we might just think these have to be part of our spaces, but if we really challenge ourselves to go through our items, we might find that they're actually not useful for anything else besides stuff, and maybe the stuff inside we didn't actually need. So really be mindful before you rush out and buy organizational supplies. Ask yourself if you really need them, or if maybe the problem is not organizational issues, it's just that you have more than you need. And then the last myth is before I get rid of my items, I need to make sure I know exactly where each item is going or that I have the perfect place for each item. This one's really tricky because of course we wish that every item we had a great recipient that we know would get value out of the item. But something that we have to address, at least within American culture and likely any place where overconsumption is pretty rampant. Unfortunately, it is likely that most families or a large percentage of families are living this way as well and also have more than they need. What that means is that it's likely going to be more difficult to find that ideal recipient that you're looking for. There are many great theories and options about what you can do with your stuff, but unfortunately, sometimes you're not going to be able to sell it for what you want or even find a buyer. Maybe the donation shop actually doesn't need that item. Maybe they have too much already. Maybe the quality of it is not good enough to be able to sell to another person or even donate to a charity shop of sorts. And maybe you have no one in mind who would be able to use a certain item. It's really difficult, but I think we have to remember this blunt truth. At some point, whether it's in our lifetime or in the lifetime of future generations, everything we own, you can take a look around you, everything you own is going to be trash at some point. And that's really sad. As an environmentalist, that really upsets me. And it just feels really wasteful. But that's the truth. Even some of your most prized possessions, eventually, at some point, even if it's in 100 years, 200 years from now, at some point, that particular item is going to be trash. Whether it's because someone held on to their stuff their entire life, and when they died, there was just too much to go through, so people just send it all away in a dumpster, just because when it's overwhelming, that's kind of what happens sometimes. Or eventually it's going to break. Or eventually society is going to change and no longer value that stuff. We see it all the time with different belongings being more or less important in different generations. And while this is upsetting and frustrating, I hope that it gives you a little freedom to know, well, even if I held on to this forever, it doesn't actually make the situation better, and eventually it will be thrown away. Really, where we can start to shift this is preventing things from coming into our spaces and preventing consumption of items that are not going to actually add value and that are made in a very low quality way. We can actually vote with our dollars to make sure more quality items are being produced if we stop spending as much on the lower quality stuff and more on the items that are actually better quality. That's an important shift we can make within the market. For the stuff you already have, if you can't sell it, if it's not good enough to donate, if you don't know anyone who you can give the item to directly, maybe throwing away is the best option. And while it's not a great option, eventually it was probably going to happen anyway. Now that I've had a chance to debunk these 4 decluttering myths, I hope you feel ready to tackle an area of clutter in your own space. But if you do need some additional guidance, you can go ahead and check out one of my past videos over here. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, you can do that right up here. We'll see you next time. Bye.